Hello, so we are continuing on our Unity series where we actually set up our character, and last time we finished with the two characters, so let me open the scene just to remind you basically our combat scene basically. And in this video I'm just going to walk you through how to create this scene with a little bit different animation, so we can create like a channeling spell or maybe self buff effects. Okay, let me show you what I've got. So by the end of this video you should have basically something like this. So you have a character doing like a cast animation or summon animation in that case, spawning a buff on the ground, and his cast in his hand animation as well. As you can see here, he's holding like some sort of VFX prefab, and there'll be couple scripts task to do as well, because we need to parent our VFX to his bone or socket location, and we're just going to spawn those two VFX prefabs as well. Okay, and before we start, I just want to show you what I've managed to create in terms of VFX, and maybe it's gonna inspire you, or maybe it's gonna give you an idea what could be done basically. Okay, so you can experiment on your own. And so I've got like a fiery spell of fire buff. What I could add to it is maybe some sort of effect on the character material itself, but because this is the content I'm creating for my patrons this month, yeah, I decided to just focus on the VFX and the material functions as well. Okay, but that's the basic idea. Okay, so let's maybe start creating the scene, and let's do some scripting and the animation of this buff character. All right. Okay, so this is where we ended last time. So let me just remind you, I'm gonna press play, and we got two characters. You press Z, the one shooting projectile, the other reacts with the hit animation, and we got some hit effects being spawned there as well. Okay, so I noticed that we've made a couple mistakes. So if you click on the plane, for example, you see some random values here, so I'm just gonna fix those by 0, those values. Now you can see that both our characters are actually floating, so I'm just gonna adjust it just a tiny bit to match them a little bit better to the ground. So I actually want this one floating just a little bit, because if I press play, you can see its animation is like that character is actually floating anyway. So maybe later on we could add some sort of dust cloud that is coming off, like he's hovering or something, and obviously that's a mage, so it kind of makes sense to add maybe some sort of cartoony hovering dust effect near his feet. So I'm just gonna leave it like that, and let me just go into my enemy, and it seems like the enemy is still a little bit above the ground, under the ground, so I'm just gonna lift that character a bit. Okay. Okay, so now let's focus on creating the scene. So what I'm gonna do, I'm just gonna save what I've got here. I'm gonna duplicate it by pressing Ctrl D, and I'm gonna call this one buff scene, and I'm gonna rename this one to combat. Yep. Now reload, and I'm just gonna double click on my buff scene to open it. Okay. Okay, so now we can do a little bit cleanup. So I'm gonna get rid of the target because I don't need it anymore, and I'm gonna maybe center the location of our mage character. Okay, so I'm gonna rotate it maybe a little bit towards the camera. I'm gonna zero the position again, and maybe I will switch to local mode, which is located here. So whenever I'm gonna rotate it, it seems like we're still getting some weird position changes, but I think it doesn't matter at this point. Right, because I think the pivot point is here. So maybe I'm just gonna switch it to pivot point to be here, basically. So now when I rotate my character, you see only the rotation is actually changing and not the position. Okay, so maybe, you know, I wanna get some sort of this kind of angle, and I'm just gonna manipulate the camera now. So we could get a lot better view for our character. I'm gonna zero the X position as well. Okay, I don't wanna do this. Maybe it seems like I'm still have this offset here. And I want it to be on the center of the screen, so maybe something like this. Okay, now I'm gonna save the scene. And what I'm gonna do, I'm actually gonna duplicate this character. So we got prefab here, I'm just gonna duplicate it and call it buff. So I'm gonna get rid of that one from the scene and drag that one into the scene. And I'm gonna zero the position, although it seems like our rotation and the position has been changed somehow. Probably because I have not, I forgot to save the prefab. Okay, so let's continue. So we have our character, it's rotated as we want. If we press play, everything still works, but now the problem is that the character actually cast a spell as a projectile. So let's fix that. Okay, so what we have to do, we have to duplicate the animator, and let's call it buff. Well, as you can see, I already have a buff there because I've did it before, so I'm gonna call it buff tutorial so we can go through together. Okay, so I'm gonna just drag it over here, and in the buff tutorial I'm gonna go into base layer, and for the cast I'm gonna pick a different animation, and I think let's see what summon look like. Okay, so I think summon is pretty cool, so I'm gonna use this one. So I'm gonna click on the cast and pick a summon animation and drag it over here. I can slow it down or speed it up. It depends how much time my buff spell as a VFX will actually take. So you can manipulate this variable as well. Okay. Do we have to fix the attack, our attack that we've created? Let's just double check. I'm gonna switch to attack. So it happens at 22nd frame. So let's go into our summon and see what's actually happening at 22nd. It should be okay, so let's just continue and let's see how it goes. Okay, so don't make any changes to the attack. So I'm gonna save the prefab now, apply, and what I'm gonna do, I'm just gonna get rid of that script for now, or maybe not. Yeah, let's maybe just get rid of the projectile prefab and cast prefab as well. Maybe let's leave cast prefab. Let's just get rid of the projectile prefab. Okay, so Control Z basically if you want to go back. I'm gonna zero the projectile speed, and now we're gonna see it how it looks. We should get a red arrow because we don't have a projectile prefab anymore. Okay, so we're actually using the summon animation now. Cool. So what's next? Let's maybe create where we would like to cast or our buff to appear. So ideally I want a buff to appear somewhere around his feet, somewhere around here. So let me go into his rig, and I'm gonna create empty child object. I'm gonna call it buff location, and I'm gonna offset it to appear roughly around here. Okay, and I'm gonna save the prefab now. I'm gonna drag buff location. Actually, I'm not gonna drag it over because we need to duplicate that script and create a buff script essentially. Okay, so I'm gonna Control D to duplicate that script, and I'm gonna call it buff. And now, because we renamed it, we got a red error because it's not ideal to duplicate scripts. So all you have to do, you have to basically rename it, open it in Visual Studio, copy the name of it, and replace the name of that script here. Okay, once you save it, we should get exactly the same. And we should have the same prefab, but with a different name now. So now I'm going to get rid of that script, and I'm going to apply buff script instead. And I'm going to save the prefab now. Okay, so now let's maybe open our buff script, and let's do some cleaning. Okay, so I need to rename this because this is no longer projectile fire location. This is our buff location. You can call it buff spawn location. Actually, that's what I'm gonna do. And I'm gonna call this one buff prefab. I'm gonna copy paste this to replace the projectile fire location, and buff prefab instead of projectile prefab. And also I'm just gonna comment this, as we don't have projectile anymore and we don't want our buff to move at all. We just want to spawn at the location, and that's it. It could be like a channeling spell as well. Okay, so that's what I'm gonna do. And also I need to change this into game object clone cast, mainly because I want to parent it, right? So I'm gonna show you in a second, but let's maybe write the script first. So clone cast transform parent equals cast location transform, and semicolon at the end. Okay, whoops. Right, so basically what it's gonna do is gonna parent our cast prefab into the location of the cast bone or socket that we've created. Okay, so let me show you exactly what I mean. So currently, when our player is gonna actually create his cast effect, is gonna stay at the spawn location. However, our characters during this spell is actually rising its hand. So basically we don't want VFX to stay in location, we want to follow his hand. That's why we're parenting it. Okay, hopefully that makes sense. Okay, so let me just see if we fixed it, and yep. Okay, so everything works. Hopefully, I think it's gonna work. Okay, so let's test it. So we need some prefabs now, but let's say we've got our buff location, spawn location, so we're just gonna drag this bone or socket, if you prefer, here. For the cast location, we need to find it, and I think it's located somewhere around here. Not leg, it should be maybe spine, left shoulder, and we have here cast location. Okay, so I'm just gonna assign this cast location to here, and now we need some VFX. So let me dive into our templates. We've got template cast. What's this one? Okay, so this seems like it could work. So I'm just gonna duplicate this one and call it buff template, or just gonna add buff in the beginning. So buff cast template. I'm gonna assign it here. And for the buff prefab, let's do the same thing. So let's just duplicate this one and let's call buff buff template. So we basically have like a, you know, placeholder prefabs and VFX that we can work with. And we're just testing the functionality now, and I just want to see if it works. So I'm just gonna press play, wait for the scene to load, press Z, and we can see our first the cast is spawning and following his hand, which is what we wanted. And if you focus here, you can see we've got another VFX spawning at his bottom of his legs as well. But maybe let's make it a little bit more you know, representable for us. So I'm just gonna drag this into the scene, which is our cast template, and I'm gonna last longer, so I'm gonna change lifetime to 1, something like this. Also, I feel it's a bit too big, so I'm just gonna change the start size to maybe something like 2 and 3, or maybe even less, so 1 and 2 maybe. And I'm gonna save it. And for our buff template, I'm just gonna change this to be on horizontal axis only. So I'm just gonna go to renderer, billboard, horizontal billboard, and now we see it's actually appeared there. So I'm gonna change this lifetime to something like 1 and 1.3 maybe. Whoops. And make it larger, something like between 8 and 10. And for the size maybe, or maybe for the order, let's fix the order first. So sort mode oldest in front, and for the size maybe let's go with something like 0.75. Okay, so we've got this weird flickering, and I think the reason is because I dragged this prefab to be exactly on the front, but because of our socket or bone that we are attaching this prefab is actually lifted above the ground a bit, it will be okay, so don't worry about it. I'm just gonna save this one, and now if you press play, we should have both of those buff placeholder effects working correctly. Okay, so it seems like our buff VFX is something wrong with it, so let me just double check. I'm just gonna select our, yeah, it seems like I'm attaching actually the wrong prefab there. So for the buff prefab, I just want to have a buff template instead of cast, and I'm gonna save the player prefab now. And as you can see, it's actually working correctly. So now you can, you know, go back and replace those two templates we've created with your own cast effect. Okay. I just want to show you again what I've done myself. So I'm just gonna attach buff here and cast for the cast. Apply it and play it. Okay, so feel free to experiment, you know, on your own, and maybe you'll be able to create something a lot better than I did. Obviously, the character's got like a blue tint here, so maybe something frosty, like a frost spell, might work a little bit better than the fiery one. Okay, but yeah, that's the basic idea, and I hope this is gonna allow you to, you know, create some buff effects or channeling spells as well. Like a meteor call maybe. There's various stuff that you can basically create with those type of animations. Obviously you can slow down the animation using the animator variable for the speed of this animation as well, if you want it to last longer or maybe to be a lot more faster. Okay, so feel free to experiment, and Right, see you in the next one. Maybe in the next one we're actually gonna do some screen shake, or you know, add some more stuff to it. Let me know if you have any suggestions in the comments. Okay. All right. Thanks for watching.